Aligning with physical features requires several prerequisites. One is familiarizing yourself with the corner ahead of time, including identifying a landmark that is easy to find near the crosswalk, and the other is being skillful with memorizing the angle of the curb or other linear feature when you're aligned. We start here with figuring out which landmark we prefer to use. Finding where the flare meets the bottom of the ramp was cumbersome, so it seemed easier to find the edge of the grass, and that landmark did not seem to be too far from the crosswalk, although in some cases people might prefer a landmark that is closer to the parallel street. Next, we need to get our alignment, either by listening to the traffic or getting assistance. Here, I got assistance by having my shoulders turned to face straight. When you are aligned, you must feel and memorize the angle of the curb in relation to your body when you are aligned straight. You can use your cane, as I am doing here, moving it along the curb to the right and left, or use your feet to see how the angle of the curb feels under your feet. While you are still learning this skill, you'll need to practice with feedback from someone. So, as the instructor, once the student thinks she has the angle of the curb at that landmark memorized, I usually guide the students in circles and ask them to find the landmark again, as I am doing here. Then the students need to position their bodies so the angle of the curb feels the same as it did when they were aligned. It may take a couple of trials before they get it. Here, I was told that I was not aligned correctly and got assistance to realign. And, again, memorize the angle of the curb in relation to my body. Again, I move away and get disoriented and try it again. Finding the landmark. Feeling the angle of the curb, and positioning my body to be the same in relation to the angle of the curb that it was when I was aligned. When I ask for confirmation, I get a thumbs up. I did it! With practice like this, people can learn to become skillful at memorizing and using physical features to align. You may be wondering why we need to always align at the same place using a landmark. It's because the angle of the curb when you are aligned changes depending on where you are standing. Here's a graphic showing that when you are aligned very far from the parallel street, the angle of the curb is perpendicular to you. As you move closer to the parallel street, the angle of the curb begins to become less and less perpendicular until finally, when you are very close to the parallel street, the angle of the curb is almost parallel to you. You can use anything as a landmark as long as it is permanent, unique, easy to identify, and close enough to your crosswalk. Let's look at this corner and see how many features we can find that would make a good landmark. Where the flare slopes down and meets the ramp would make a good landmark. Here is a crack in the curb that is detectable with a cane or foot. That would work too. The top of the flare, that is where the flare slopes up from the ramp and meets the sidewalk, is too subtle to identify on the left side of the ramp, but it is identifiable on the right side of the ramp. For the other crossing, we can use the edge of the grass, and of course the flare where it meets the bottom of the ramp. There is a crack in the edge of the curb here too, but this one is too subtle to find easily. Sometimes there are poles or boxes near the curb that would make good landmarks too. Finally, let's look at a systematic way to find the pedestrian push button. You can start by walking along one street, moving your cane left and right, reaching it to the curb on one side and as far as you can to the other side, checking out any poles that you find along the way. When you've gone as far as you think it's likely to be, turn around, move away from the street just far enough that you can cover an area adjacent to what you already covered as you walk back to the corner. If you encounter bushes, you might reach over them as the pull for the push button is sometimes there. As you go through this process of finding the push button, regardless of what system you use to search, it is important to maintain your orientation. In research with crossing at signalized intersections, blind people sometimes got disoriented when looking for the button. When you return to the corner, if you haven't found it by then, start searching along the other street in the same manner until you find it. I finally found a pole with a push button for both crossings. They each had tactile arrows indicating the direction of the crosswalk, which made it easier to know which button was for which street. Once you press the push button for your crossing, you need to find your landmark and get aligned and ready to cross. All the preparation and familiarization, such as finding the landmark, memorizing how to use linear features such as the curb to align at that landmark, finding the pedestrian push button, and knowing how to get from there to your landmark to align, does not need to be done for subsequent crossings. All you need to do is go to the pedestrian push button, press it, and find your landmark, align, and you're ready to cross. If you miss your cue and don't cross with the next cycle, you need to go back to the push button and press it again, and return to your landmark to align for the crossing, repeating this process until you actually cross.